The Dunwich Horror is one of Lovecraft's most famous works and has been alluded to extensively in the decades since its release. It should go without saying, then, that this work has been examined, debated, and dissected countless times by people far more versed in Lovecraft himself and his mythos in general than I am. It's a work that, in some cases, the very lovers of the mythos find a flawed and inferior example of his talents. Yet for others, it was what first drew their interest to this amazing collection of tales. Consider this examination, then, to be intended more for those unfamiliar with Lovecraft and the deeper analysis, rather than an intention to be any kind of definitive word upon the subject. In my previous discussion of The Shadow over Innsmouth, I discussed Lovecraft's fear of genetic degeneracy. In that case, it came from interbreeding. This time, it's the other extreme, excess inbreeding. The setting of Dunwich in New England is dismissed as one of those tiny isolated towns that are around that are so inbred that there's signs the residents are becoming subhuman. The fact that this town is introduced to us from the perspective of a lost traveler suggests that this kind of thing is based upon Lovecraft's own travels, which I had mentioned previously. The situation not only adds to the horrific atmosphere of the place that Lovecraft creates, adding in, as with Innsmouth, sounds of occult goings-on by these decayed beings, but a twofold addition to the plotline. The first, because this collection of human detritus are so inbred that despite pretty much everyone being unsuited for anything besides manual labor, when the draft came in World War I, they were unable to round up enough men in acceptable physical condition. This thus brought the attention of the outside world upon Dunwich, and it was significant because that in turn brought attention upon Wilbur Whateley, who was also related to the second point, the fact that someone as inhuman in appearance as Wilbur could be regarded as nothing more than a further sign of degradation thanks to vile incest, with gossip among the town suggesting that Wilbur's mother was impregnated by her father, and neither of them were particular signs of healthy genetic specimens to begin with. But what was notable about Wilbur was, aside of the fact that he had many features that Lovecraft compared to animals, including several of his goatishness and an atrocious smell, was that rather than being a further fall from the evolutionary perch to the subhuman, Wilbur is really a remarkable specimen. Wilbur Whateley grew rapidly, and his learning outpaced even this accelerated physical stature. Wilbur is intelligent, and Lovecraft makes the decision of showing him not directly causing harm to anyone. Now, it is said that there are rumors that he's behind several youthful disappearances, and that of his own mother, and the implication seems to be that he is indeed responsible. But it could also be argued that in many cases it was someone or something else. But as far as direct violence, the only thing that he shows that Wilbur does is shoot the occasional dog in self-defense, as the animals are enraged by him. In this sense, especially given that the story follows the life of Wilbur during all of this, one can easily see, from what we discover before his death, that he is a victim, someone who is a prodigy trapped in a physically repulsive form and harangued about the countryside by vicious mutts. The interest that is drawn to him in particular when the journalists arrive to inspect the freak show of Dunwich could be seen as particularly tragic. All of this is in keeping with the idea of this horror, that good and evil are local human constructs irrelevant to the rest of the cosmos. Lovecraft's use of whippoorwills here, drawn from the legends of local tribes, are likely the nod to mythology and to perhaps also indicate that mythology, legend, and religion are intertwined in this story. For we learn eventually that Wilbur's father was not old Whateley, but something much worse, Yog-Sothoth, one of the outer gods. This, it could be argued, makes Wilbur a mocking inversion of Jesus Christ, born of a human woman but conceived by a god, and on a sacred mission for his father. For while I said that Wilbur wasn't harming anyone in the immediacy, as directly presented by Lovecraft, I mean, it's not true that he was benevolent, for his goal was the extermination of all life on Earth, not just humans, but every living creature. With all of life expunged, the Earth can then be taken elsewhere to be used for some other purpose. They want Earth, but it's infested, and Wilbur is the exterminator. There is nothing inherently malicious about it. To them, This is the equivalent of boiling a pot of water before you drink it. But as I said, this is an inversion. Rather than being born to save the world, Wilbur is born to destroy it, or at the very least everything living on it. The nature of this is open to some debate, as Lovecraft wisely keeps the details hidden so that the reader can fill in the blanks with their own imaginings. Did Wilbur's poor mother volunteer to have intercourse with the monstrous Yog-Sothoth? Or did the outer god force itself upon her? Or, if it wasn't outright rape, was she nevertheless coerced by her father into sex with the creature, one way or the other? Or was this, as with the biblical tale that this mirrors, a case of Yog-Sothoth not literally engaging in physical sex, but a supernatural conception? The outer god could hardly have been genetically compatible with her after all. But then again, the crossbreeding with the deep ones in Innsmouth suggests that such monstrosities are capable of bridging the gap, such that a woman who could never be impregnated by a chimpanzee can nevertheless be impregnated by a fish. Continuing this mockery, Wilbur Whateley is seen in his youth as a carpenter. His grandfather has begun doing work on their farmhouse interior, making more space, and soon the young Wilburs drafted to aid in this ever-ongoing task. This is one of two tasks that the two are frequently involved in, the other being the purchase of cattle for reasons that the locals gossip about but cannot confirm, as the cows don't wind up in old Whateley's fields. The money to pay for this, as well as other things, such as convincing people to look the other way when people go missing, are old gold coins. Yet we later discover that there is no stash of ancient coinage about the place, suggesting the possibility that the old god is responsible for the money in furtherance of the mission. After the passing of old Whateley, Wilbur sought to find the incantation from the Necronomicon that his grandfather had spoken about. They have an English copy, but the English one deviates substantially from the source material, so Wilbur seeks out a rare Latin copy at one of the great university libraries, Miskatonic, where Dr. Armitage enters the story. Armitage reads from the book about the threat of Yog-Sothoth and declines to allow Wilbur to remove the book or copy from it, and tells others with a copy not to let the giant, for Wilbur had grown to be over 8 feet tall by now, to have the book. The Necronomicon is without a doubt the most famous Lovecraft creation, becoming so ubiquitous that it appeared once in the animated The Real Ghostbusters series. It appeared in later episodes, but not by name, because the presence of print volumes, which were inspired by the fictional one, existed in bookstores, and the executives at the network were convinced that they were drawing attention to an actual book of evil spells. The rarity of the book and the firm impression Armitage left with the keepers of the volumes ensure that Williams can't get what he wants. So in the end, he attempts to steal it from Miskatonic in the night. He is done in, however, by one of the dogs that had hounded him all through his life, his pistol having a single bent cartridge that was all that stood between the life of all creatures on Earth and the culmination of Wilbur's mission. The guard dog is thus the greatest hero in the entire story, for it kills Wilbur right there in the library, finally allowing them all to see the hideously deformed monster he concealed beneath his clothes. Wilbur isn't merely some satyr-like creature as the demonic intimation throughout the story might suggest, but rather a hideous monstrosity, which I leave to Lovecraft to detail for you in his unique combination of detail and horror. Lovecraft likewise makes the point in the following chapter that Wilbur was not, in fact, the Dunwich horror the title spoke of, that everything about him was merely prologue to that. With Armitage entering the story, the focus of it moved away from Wilbur and onto him, and those like him who opposed whatever it was he was doing. The hollowed-out house seems empty, though later the house explodes inexplicably, and afterwards dead cattle are discovered with the blood removed. Things become tense until finally one family is heard crying out for help on the party line, the shared community phone line of the time, and the place is found demolished the next day, the occupants gone. The community is ill-equipped to deal with whatever the horror is, which is perhaps why Armitage, in an unusual twist for Lovecraft, becomes the hero. And it is no surprise, given how Armitage develops, that Lovecraft were to admit privately that he felt a connection with the man. Now, Lovecraft's characters are usually cowed by what they encounter. This is not totally universal, but it is enough to cause some to even cast aspersions on this story for this out-of-step narrative decision. But Armitage's heroism is not of the usual type. Indeed, it is often noted that Wilbur Whateley fits the hero's journey more than Armitage. Armitage is not a brash young man with great courage and good health to back it up. He's an aged librarian who specializes in what is generally a field of pure scholarly research, the study of esoteric languages. And he is not motivated by a brave defiance, as the term hero might suggest. He's motivated by terror, a terror that in many moments overwhelms him. Yet with the threat that is being posed by this incursion into our three-dimensional world, Armitage takes desperate action to avert catastrophe. Wilbur's diary is retrieved from his home, and despite experts being unable to crack it, Armitage sees the matter of such overwhelming import that he studies cryptography until, at last, he can break the old magician code and begin employing it to read the diary. The contents horrify him, telling fully of Wilbur and Old Man Whateley's plans to expunge life from the earth and allow it to be used by Yog-Sothoth and those from beyond, who cannot exist in this world without human blood, that is, without being intermixed with humanity, as happened with Wilbur. Armitage is thus not a hero in the mythological sense. He is a hero simply because no one else is aware of the threat to the degree that he is, and thus he is forced by circumstance to rise to answer it. Only his associates, Morgan and Rice, are involved. Not even the police, because the body of Wilbur had collapsed in front of them and been unidentifiable by the time the authorities came there. And the tale is so fantastical, they know that no one will believe them. It is one of the classic speculative fiction elements. The heroes confront the menace because no one else will be convinced that such a menace exists. Armitage then further steps up his heroism once they have joined up with the Dunwich folks, who are being menaced by some giant invisible thing. The men out there are terrified, and so Armitage, again, a librarian, realizes that these inbred low IQ bumpkins need someone to lead them, and so tells them what the menace is that they face, to show the importance of dealing with the threat, and that they can deal with it. Armitage has several spells that he's memorized and copied and mixed up a formula to make the creature visible. Lovecraft has played with the idea of science being wielded against what is traditionally the occult, such as in The Shunned House, wherein the plan is to fight the vampire using Crookes tubes in case it's insubstantial, and flamethrowers in case it isn't. The elephant gun employed by one of Armitage's colleagues is recognized as a security blanket, and will have no effect on such a being. Brute force can't solve this problem. Thus, in the mythos where terror drives men to madness, the only truly effective weapon is a sane, intelligent mind. The role of Armitage as hero is, I think, then recognized because the story then pulls away from Armitage and views events through the eyes of the helpless locals. Armitage confronts the beast with the magical words, which could make for fine film, but by keeping it instead as a distant event, the audience is denied the sense of hope that heroism can usually inspire, and remains steadily upon dread and horror before then shifting into relief at the knowledge that, for the moment, the threat has been dealt with. This parallels the climax of Wilbur Whateley's journey, which likewise saw its climax happen at a distance. Indeed, I think together Wilbur and Armitage offer an interesting commentary upon the subversion of the hero. Wilbur's is that he follows a comparable hero's journey, but in a world where what we consider evil would be laudable. Armitage's own journey does not follow the conventions, yet he ultimately fits the role of hero in the story regardless of that. But the real power of Dunwich horror, the reason I believe it remains one of Lovecraft's most popular works, isn't the plot, but rather how the events are allowed to unfold, and the details of it that create a powerful, almost oppressive atmosphere at times. Lovecraft even thumbs his nose at the cliches by scolding any suggestion that Wilbur's deformity would be beyond the ability of human pen to describe, and does so with horrific exactitude, as befitting the scholars who are viewing it. And then, more generally, with the actual horror that Armitage reveals in Wilbur's twin brother, when it's described by the overwhelmed Dunwich observers who see it through a telescope. Both descriptions chill the reader with the inhuman thing that sprang forth from a human womb, defeated by human strength, but invited in by human weakness. As the Necronomicon made clear, this was once their world and will be theirs again. The victory of Armitage delays their conquest of the earth, but does not necessarily deny their eventual victory.